There is a back door in the event that we need to escape that way, or not that we need to escape at all. Nothing's going to happen. Manifesting. If for some reason there's scaries in the back, then we can go upstairs. So that is the plan. And I just want everyone to be on the same page about that.
Security was top of mind ahead of a drag story hour at this bookstore in Missoula, Montana. There was an armed guard, volunteer security, and a list of other precautions.
If you see anything or anything at all, you can. Baguette is going to be the safe word. So
Baguette.
Just came to me. So yeah. So baguette, if anything at all, and then priority is to get y'all and families out.
All these security measures isn't just paranoia. Just a month earlier, at 2 drag story hours here, white supremacists showed up.
Child grooming. This is pedophilia. You should all be ashamed of yourselves. They wish to groom their children. If you brought your child here, take them home.
I'm taking a break from being a supervillain today to read to you all.
This drag story hour had to happen in a private bookstore.
The motion has passed.
In May, Montana lawmakers passed a law explicitly banning drag story hours in public schools and libraries.
In my humble opinion, there's no such thing as a family-friendly drag show.
It's all part of what drag performers say is a cultural and political war on drag and LGBTQ rights. It's a political battle playing out in state legislatures across the country. At least 6 states have passed laws that restrict drag in some way, with successful legal challenges doing little to stop the momentum. And this is also playing out on the streets.
31 men believed to be linked to the right-wing extremist group, the Patriot Front, now facing charges after authorities say they plan to riot at a weekend pride event in Idaho.
Since early 2022, there have been 161 protests, threats, or acts of violence targeted at drag events nationwide. In Texas, lawmakers introduced 141 bills this year that critics say targeted the LGBTQ community. And in June, Texas passed one of the harshest drag laws in the country.
It's stupid. It's backwards. If I'm performing in a club, then you get a completely different performance than you would if I'm reading books to children.
I went to both Montana and Texas to find out what this obsession with drag was all about.
When you disallow drag, you are disallowing an art form that is integral to the history of what it means to be queer in this country.
Missoula is home to the largest pride celebration in Montana. Nearly 15,000 people came for this weekend to line up for the parties, the parade, and as a form of protest.
I warned the straight people, if you keep attacking our community, we will continue to take months out of your calendar. By all means, stand up, stand together, and while the past was terrible, the future is so amazing. You want to know why? Because it's glitter and rainbows!
But organizers didn't advertise the drag story hour this weekend. That's because it's these events specifically, where drag performers read books to children, that are at the heart of this debate on drag.
Once upon a time,
these drag story hours have been the target of lawmakers in Montana, have been the target of far-right extremists in Montana. Why not just stop doing these?
if we stop doing story hours and we stop doing all ages events, then what is that saying to queer youth in our state? Montana is one of the states that people are fleeing en masse. It's like Texas, it's like Florida, people are running away. But kids can't leave.
If we stop doing them, what message does that send? We're giving up on them. We're giving in to the haters, to the queer phobes, the transphobes.
And I want every one of you here to know today that because you're here seeing Drag Queen Story Hour, you also have parents who are going to love you and support you, no matter who you fall in love with.
Pride organizers like Logan Foray have had to make sense of what this new reality means for the city's Pride event.
What has it been like planning Pride in this political climate?
It has not been an easy year. It's been wildly stressful. This isn't just about planning a festival anymore. This is about fighting. We've had very clear white supremacists and neo-Nazis trying to, infiltrate our volunteer signups and get information.
Walk me through some of the specific threats that you guys have gotten.
The first one I believe we got was somebody that kept utilizing the word very blatantly, "It's time for a kaboom." And they'd go to another partner's page and be posting the same thing, the same verbiage that was clearly stating or actually have some sort of meme or GIF that was showing a bomb going off. So that was our first major sign of a potential threat. I would say security measures equated to about 20% of our overall cost in the festival, which is pretty astronomical.
After an incident-free Pride weekend, we headed to Great Falls, a picturesque 3-hour drive from Missoula, to meet up with the lawmaker who proposed Montana's drag bill, a 23-year-old state representative named Braxton Mitchell. He's made false statements conflating drag story hours for children with drag events for adults,
where they start stripping on stage and dancing provocatively in women's lingerie, and children are encouraged to throw money at them. And in many instances, there's videos and photos that can be found with 4- and 5-year-old children touching these drag kings and queens and stuffing money into their G-strings.
Mitchell is a MAGA Republican and part of Montana's recent swing to the right and into America's culture wars.
Why drag?
In Billings, Montana, there was a drag story hour, drew a lot of public outcry across the state. Had some folks here in my district that kind of mentioned it to me. This wasn't going on 5 years ago, when I was going to school, kind of saying, hey, we grew up without this stuff. It wasn't even a consideration.
But why not leave it up to the parents? Why create a law that forbids them to make that decision?
Again, I think the bill completely still leaves parents' rights in the discussion. I think the government has a role in saying what goes on in taxpayer-funded schools and libraries, which my bill specifically tailors to. I think kids should be going to school to get an education, not to be indoctrinated with some, performance. And I listen to my constituents, and I haven't heard one parent in my district say that we want a drag queen or a drag king in our schools or in our libraries. And I think that they have every right to, have their month and have their chance and have their, do what they want to do.
But they don't have every right because they're being taken away by laws that you support.
The bill includes any obscene or sexual or lewd performances on public property. Those events are prohibited too. So if drag isn't sexual like they claim it's not, then why are they complaining about the law,
Do you think that drag performers, members of the LGBTQ community, by being very public with their identity, are sexualizing children?
I mean, there's some of that goes on. I wouldn't disagree. The vast majority of folks would agree so, I think, in my area and the vast majority of folks here in Montana. And there's a reason that, 80% of my colleagues agree with that also.
One national survey showed that a majority of Republicans support these laws, but that overall, most people, 58%, say that they would oppose a legal restriction on drag shows in their state. For Stefan and Rylan, who are getting ready to perform as Sophia Shadow and Alada Shadow tonight, drag isn't a political debate. It's a lifeline. They've asked us only to use their first names to avoid online harassment.
Gluing down eyebrows always takes so much time.
It's faster.
Yeah, I already know the answer to that. But I won't ever do it.
And how did you guys first get into drag?
As someone who was recently figuring out that they were trans and just at a very low point in my life, Sophia asked me if I would help her with a number. And then I said, well, wait, what if I do it in drag? So I got stuff and I made my own hip pads out of foam and I put them on and I said, oh my God, this is how I feel inside my head. And so drag has been a lifesaver. It's been an art for me, a saving grace.
What has it been like watching all these states pass drag bans?
It's more than frustrating for me because these laws don't only impact drag performers, they also impact trans people or even cis people who don't fit the like idea of feminine enough or masculine enough. But we're also seeing regular everyday people being affected by these laws.
It's just causing a cultural war that doesn't need to be happening. And I just see it as a political movement because of, since in Montana and elections are coming up, they're taking that power to persuade people to vote for them.
So you think it's like a political tactic?
More than that, it's a way to maintain control. When someone questions what the norm is supposed to be, people don't like that. People don't like having their worldviews questioned or threatened. It's really hard to give up control, and people see equality as oppression because they have to give up the control that they have historically had over queer people, over people of color, over drag performers. But on the other hand, drag has always been resistance, and it always will be resistance. It's a celebration, yes, but it is a statement of survival on top of that.
Once fully in their drag personas, it was time for the fun part.
Are you guys ready for your next performer?
We are here as a community. We support each other, and we will show them that we will not be going anywhere.
Montana's political fight around LGBTQ laws in the state went national with the censure of transgender state lawmaker Zoe Zephyr.
Then to Montana. The escalating battle between Montana's first openly transgender female lawmaker and a Republican-controlled legislature.
Zoe Zephyr, the state's first transgender legislator, tonight is banned from the House floor for the rest of this year's session.
Zephyr was censured after these remarks on a bill that banned gender-affirming care for minors.
And the only thing I will say is if you vote yes on this bill and yes on these amendments, I hope the next time there's an invocation, when you bow your heads in prayer, you see the blood on your hands.
The decision to censure Zephyr drew a crowd of Zephyr supporters to the House gallery in a dramatic standoff.
So to me,
we spoke with Zephyr in a place where drag story hours are now illegal.
And if it wasn't for this law, that drag story hour would be happening here in Missoula Public Library in this beautiful space.
this is the People's Library. This is what we get as a community. This is a public space. And what does it mean to say, hey, your community, the art forms that are valuable to your community, they don't belong in public space. They don't belong in what is, in theory, open to all of us. And when you ban us from public spaces, you ban community and our love and our joy from those public spaces.
55% of gender non-binary and transgender youth in Montana say they've considered suicide. That is a huge figure. Why do you think that is?
If you are in a place that says you can't access the healthcare you need, if you're in a place that says you can't get the government documents you need, what does it say that at every step along that path, a state is asking you if you belong, and passing bills that say you don't, and debating your existence again and again and again?
As a trans lawmaker in Montana, what was it like seeing this drag ban bill proposed and then become the actual law of the land in this state?
The sponsor of the bill in his opening said this has nothing to do with trans people, despite the fact that in his request to legislative services when he was seeking to draft the bill, he said, drag doesn't belong here, and, I want to stop these trans strippers. So even in the initial drafting, he was conflating drag, which is an art form, with trans, which is not an art form. Trans is just who I am.
Texas filed more anti-trans bills than any other state this legislative session, according to Axios. And among these bills, the proposal to ban children from drag performances was listed as a top priority. The Dallas Public Library hosted its first ever drag story hours in 2018. By 2019, negative reactions and rampant misinformation about these events began to spread online. That would soon coalesce into a full-fledged and ultimately successful movement to restrict drag in Texas and ban them from public libraries entirely. Tell me about the drag story hours that happened here.
Just kind of magical. I mean, they have fancy outfits, and for a lot of our kids, it's like getting to meet a princess, so there's just an element of specialness, a special event.
This is a Breitbart headline from the drag story event you hosted here in 2019. What do you make of this? It says, drag queen reads, "What color is your underwear?" to young children.
I think it's, it's a clickbait headline. Like, it's trying to get people enraged.
So what's the real story from this event?
So there's nothing inappropriate about the book. It's just fun. I mean, underwear is something that cracks kids up. There's nothing scandalous about it. It's just something that's fun and funny for kids. I think people fail to see that, our library staff are trained to be able to select books that are appropriate for kids, and, they understand developmentally what's appropriate for kids.
How is this new law impacting your ability to do these events here?
So SB 12 is pretty ambiguous, and we don't really know, but it still is very much up to interpretation, and so that's what our legal team's trying to figure out right now.
One thing that comes up in the debate over these laws is that this is a recent trend. But drag has a long and rich history here in Texas. This is really massive.
This is massive.
Robert Emery spearheaded the creation of the largest queer history archives in the region. So what's the history of drag in Texas?
If you go back to the 1920s, there were traveling vaudeville shows, and there was a gentleman who was famous. He used his own voice, and he had costumes that were incredibly elaborate. He would copy Queen Victoria's wedding dress or Cleopatra's ceremonial gown, and he would delight his audiences. When they appeared at the state fair, that was family day, and schools who came as a group with their teachers got in free that day.
So in the 1920s, a female impersonator, what we would know as a drag queen, was considered a family-friendly thing?
It certainly was. It was considered art. It was considered something to be amazed by. And there was nothing scary or threatening about it. It's only when you layer on that by a politician is when you have a problem. Let me show you everyone's favorite drag queen, the Cassie Nova. She stays in the warehouse here currently, and when people come by, it's astounding the number of people who walk through the warehouse and look up very, very high where she's stored and says, "Is that Cassie Nova?"
It takes James Love nearly 3 hours to transform into Cassie Nova.
A little tighter on the bottom.
For many here, Cassie Nova is the face of drag in Texas.
This is not drag queen story hour, so I cut.
Cassie's been performing drag in Dallas for over 2 decades.
You a lesbian? Not you, her.
And I wanted to ask her about some of the less official, less explicit reasoning behind these bills. What do you say to people who don't want their kids exposed to the idea of being gay, the idea of being trans, because they feel like they will be influenced into being those things?
As a parent, that is your right, that is your choice. And I 100% support a parent's right to choose what their child is confronted with. At the same time, not everybody thinks like you. And just because you don't want your child to see it does not mean you should stop other people from letting their kids see it. Because in all honesty, seeing representation as a young person changes the trajectory of your life. We didn't have that representation, and so you feel so closed off. So growing up now, I think about how great it is for all of these young people to see somebody on TV that they see themselves in. And it means so much because you don't feel so alone. And feeling alone is the reason that our suicide rate among gay, bisexual, trans, lesbians is so high, because you feel so closed off and so alone. But just seeing two guys on television that hold hands is amazing to someone who never saw that before.
What I've heard from lawmakers, or what we've all heard from lawmakers, is this is gay propaganda.
We don't want your straight child to turn gay. We want your gay child to survive and to become a productive gay citizen. That's our agenda. We want our young gay, queer young people to survive through their teen years and early 20s and get to the point in their life where they find out who they are and can be happy with that. It's not a propaganda. I want them to see what I didn't see when I was young.